Hello everyone, this is Ryo Hotaro from the Bioware social network site. Since the release of the Mass Effect 3 trailer on the Spike VGAs a few days ago, I decided to take my brand new desktop and use it to create some videos about my favorite video game, Mass Effect. These first series of videos will involve a fairly highly debated topic over on the social network site, which I felt was deserving of a discussion. This is the balance, or imbalance, depending on who you ask, of the game's morality system of Paragon versus Renegade. For those of whom not completely aware of what that is, Mass Effect's Paragon and Renegade system is a morality system that, instead of dealing in flat black and white, good versus evil, deals with more of a open hand versus closed fist, something a little bit like what Jade Empire did. Now, in the game, you can make decisions taking these two choices: Paragon, which are always labeled in blue, and Renegade, which are labeled in red. Paragon decisions usually take a more diplomatic approach, involving trying to entreat a character by appealing to them on some level, trying to convince them not to do something rash or irrational, and usually trying to avoid a conflict. Renegade, of course, typically deals in a more close-fisted approach, usually dealing with intimidation tactics, bullying, force, threats of force, sometimes even openly shooting people. There are exceptions, of course. Some Paragon actions involve being a little bit taking more initiative, and some Renegade decisions are actually a bit more subtle, but that's not the point of this. The point of this video, or rather series of videos, is about the argument about the imbalance of the system, or the perceived imbalance of the system. You see, Renegade players over on the social network like to debate that Paragons are basically the favored pets of Bioware, that we are their champions. They will always favor the Paragon player. In case you're wondering, I did refer to myself as a Paragon player. I do take Renegade decisions myself, sometimes if I feel it is a natural choice, but I mostly take a more Paragon approach to decisions in the game. The imbalance that the Renegade players speak of is the fact that they feel that Paragons make decisions that are irrational, illogical, just plain stupid, and we are never punished for it. We never have our decisions backfire in our face. We never get a negative consequence for it. The game bends around our decisions to make sure it always comes out right. Sometimes in a way that you think the only reason you would make this choice is if you knew ahead of time that the decision was better. And I feel this is incredibly unfair and incorrect. So, these videos will go over each of the different choices, or at least the more hotly contested choices, from Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2. I'll go over the background for each problem, what the Paragon and Renegade choices for each problem entail, why the Renegades don't like the Paragon choice, and why they're wrong. Now, this isn't intended to just bash the Renegade players. I don't feel that the Renegades are illogical for taking the choices they take. I understand them. I've made some of those choices myself in playthroughs. I just feel that their persecution of the Paragon side as being, all sunshine and rainbows and goodwill and wishful thinking is just wrong. So, we'll start with Mass Effect 1. Mass Effect 1 Contested Decision Number 1. The Rachni Queen. Background. On one of the storyline worlds in Mass Effect 1 Noveria, you discover that your nemesis Saren Arterius was working on a way to revive an ancient race known as the Rachni. To provide some context, the Rachni are an insect race who once swarmed through the galaxy, engaging in a war with the rest of the Council races. To help stem this flood, the Council employed the Krogan as mercenaries, who not only halted the advance, but wiped out the Rachni into almost total extinction. Almost total extinction because, back to the present in Mass Effect 1, a ship was found containing ancient Rachni eggs, which were hatched. One of these eggs contained a queen, who has the ability to repopulate the entire race. After shooting your way through this facility, and either dealing or not dealing with the tons of Rachni below, and then after a boss fight with Saren's henchman, Matriarch Benezia, you discover that the Queen is not only sentient, she is also sapient. She somehow mentally controls or urges one of the near-dead Asari commandos to get back up, walk over to the tank so that the Queen can speak through her. The Queen reveals that Saren intended to use her children as beasts of war, shock troops against the Council, and says that the reason her children even attacked you in the first place while you were going through the facility was that without her there to guide them, they basically went completely insane, as apparently Rachni Young required the Queen to function at all. She then tells you that whether or not you've dealt with her children at this point, you have a choice to make. Will you release her, or will you kill her? Your two squad mates at this point will point out that there are acid tanks rigged above her tube, which, if set off, will end her life. The other squad mate, who doesn't talk about the tanks, will say that you really don't have the right to decide the life or death of a species, and that some grudges are just best left untouched. At this point, the Queen says that your companions are correct. You need to make a choice about me. What will you do? If you investigate further, you discover that the Queen doesn't know what happened during the war, that in fact, her people's song, their method of communication, was tainted, oiled, discolored, discordant, dissonant, alluding to mind control of some kind, something that urged them to fight the rest of the galaxy. You can also question her about what she'll do if you let her go, in which case she says that she will not threaten anyone else. She doesn't desire to go to war with the rest of the galaxy. They wish to be left in peace. The Rachni are not expansionist race. They simply like to remain where they are and to be left alone. At this point, you have to make your final decision. The Paragon decision. The Paragon decision involving the Queen has Commander Shepard releasing the Queen so that she may escape with her life. The Queen then offers up that she will tell her children of your forgiveness and mercy, and that they will always remember what you did for them and not bother the galaxy again. The Renegade decision. The Renegade decision involving the Rachni Queen has Shepard state that the Rachni end here, and you go to set off the tanks. The Queen freaks out, thrashes around a bit, but it is to no avail. The acid destroys her completely. It is worth noting that during this decision, when you first make the decision to either kill or save them, you have the option of changing your mind before the decision takes effect. So if you wish, you can switch your decision at the last minute. Why Renegades dislike the Paragon decision? Renegades point out that the decision made by the Paragons to release the Queen is an act made on blind faith and wishful thinking. There's no way to verify any of the information the Queen tells you, and she could easily be lying to try to get her way out of confinement. They cite that her behavior should you try to kill her is indicative of said deceit, because while she originally seems to gracefully submit herself to whatever Shepard decides, as soon as Shepard goes to push the button to end her life, she begins spazzing out, often prompting people to want to kill her as quickly as possible. Other cited reasons include the fact that the Rachni were originally quite a major threat, and based on what little information you have, should the Rachni be controlled again, or if the Queen is lying, you could easily wind up with a repeat of the Rachni Wars all over again. Why the Paragon decision isn't stupid. Now let's stop and think about this for a moment. The Rachni during the war were never capable of intelligent thought or any kind of peaceful diplomacy or conversation whatsoever. They simply attacked and killed and swarmed and overran everything in sight. But here now, on Noveria, we are confronted with a Rachni Queen who is not only capable of being calm and coherent, but can have a sapient, higher-order intelligent thought conversation with Commander Shepard. This alone should prove that there is a massive difference between the Rachni of the past and the Rachni of the present. Sure, the Queen has to use the half-dead Asari Commando to try and talk to Commander Shepard, because otherwise she has no means of communication, but we shouldn't let that perhaps somewhat slightly creepy aspect of the conversation cloud our judgment. After all, you have to use what's given to you. Now, for those renegades who like to point out that the Rachni Queen's behavior should you try to kill her is somehow indicative of deceit or lying, think about the method in which you're using to kill her. You're basically dousing her in an acid bath. Now, I don't know about you, and I've had no personal experience getting splashed with acid, thank God, but from what I've heard, from what I've read on the internet, from people I've spoken to who actually handle these kinds of chemicals, that's dangerous stuff. That can be pretty painful, and it's generally not a pleasant experience whatsoever. So, in the Queen's situation, realizing her life is about to be snuffed out via a haze of excruciating, agonizing, torturous pain before her life finally ends, I don't think anyone in their right mind would just sit there and take that. Maybe, if Commander Shepard offered some painless shots to the head or something? It just doesn't feel like the Rachni Queen's behavior is indicative of deceit, more like, I don't want to die this way. This is a horrible way to die. Now, of course, the consequences of the decision tend to play a role in the Renegade's argument. For the Renegades, killing the Queen doesn't do anything for them. They push the button, the Queen gets acid bathed, and that's the end of the story. Never comes up again, is never a plot point that ever occurs. For the Paragons choosing to save the Queen, during Mass Effect 2 on Ilium, you meet a messenger who delivers a message from the Queen to Commander Shepard, again, through an Asari, this time slightly more alive, thank God, who explains that she's keeping to her word, they're keeping out of sight of the rest of the galaxy, she's remembered the promise she made, her children know of Commander Shepard's mercy, and, oh yeah, we were actually being mind-controlled. We were being forced to do something that the Rachni never do before. And Renegades like to point out that this is an unfair advantage, that somehow the Paragons having this decision work in their favor, despite the huge risk you're taking in believing the Rachni Queen with the little information you have, is just Bioware pandering to us Paragons. This isn't the case. I mean, think about it. In this decision, you're faced with an alien life form who genuinely wishes to survive, who while in the past had a track record of being violent and nasty, is now presented with an individual who is the exact opposite. I mean, why shouldn't we consider the possibility that she's telling the truth? And her lying and being deceitful? Why? If the Rachni Queen really cared about her survival, she would want to be as honest as possible, and it does seem that the Rachni Queen isn't really capable of deception or deceit. I mean, that would imply that somehow they're hardwired that way, or that they're even capable of that in the first place, which we're given no indication of. I mean, to assume that she's lying and deceiving Shepard just to try to survive is putting a human mindset and human mentality onto a species that is very, very not human. Now, the mind control argument also comes up as a reason not to let her live, though this is usually argued after the fact as a reason why not, because the Mass Effect 2 messenger confirms they were mind controlled. So, while this is a slightly metagaming argument, this is a point that can be contested. Now, as far as the mind control goes, sure, they were mind controlled in the past, some external force forced them all to go to war with the rest of the galaxy, and why couldn't it happen again? Well, the Queen has all the genetic memory of her ancestors, so she knows what happened to them. She may not know what caused it. She even comes out and says, I don't know what caused it. But she knows what it was like, what it felt like, what it sounded like, since they communicate through song. So, if the Queen were to run across this strange, mind-altering song again, she'd know what it was and she could react accordingly to it. There's nothing saying that just one dose of indoctrination rays would suddenly have the Rachni turning on the rest of the galaxy again. And anyway, for the Renegades who really think that the Paragons just get off scot-free, think about the long-term consequence of this decision. The Paragon, sure, may have the Rachni as powerful allies during Mass Effect 3, but is the rest of the galaxy really going to be so happy to see these bugs that originally nearly got everyone and took a last-minute driving force by the Krogan to stop them? Are they really going to be so happy to find out that Shepard was the one who brought them back, and that now they're going to be working alongside them? I don't think anyone's going to like that, and the Krogan especially are not going to be too happy about that. So, in the long term, if you think about it, the Paragon has a much harder time ahead of them, potentially, assuming Bioware takes this into account. They might not, in which case the Renegades probably will have a reason to rant and rave. But until that point, there isn't really a reason why it's a bad decision. Conclusion. Presented with equal information, the Paragon and Renegade player makes a decision based on personal preference and judgment. However, as the Renegades have a relatively quick and easy solution to the problem, to argue that the Paragons are being unfairly accommodated for taking a greater risk is inherently flawed for the reasons presented earlier. This concludes the first of the Mass Effect Paragon and Renegade video series.